Hey again! Today I'm going to show you what I do for my fencing swords, particularly what I use to clean them, how I clean them, and then how I set them up for when I do clean them. So this is a setup I use normally. As you can see, we have a variety of different materials here. I try to stick with 100% cotton as best I can, but mostly because I didn't want to sacrifice my shirts. I've also picked up a bunch of, you might call them rags, you might call them dirty towels, or towels that are so wore thin you don't want to use them anymore. Old towels, old washcloths. Here we got an old workout shirt I used to use. Then we have an old towel that I also used to use. An old turtleneck I used to use. Honestly, I do like the sleeves and also the neck. And that's mostly because when I do use it, it's very nice and usually fits very nicely to the handle of the sword that I'm cleaning. I know I said washcloth. Here's an example of a washcloth. And then here's a sock. The sock I like, and I'll show you why in a little bit. Here is my example sword, my Zweihander, gifted as a wedding present to me and my husband. This is how I like to have the setup, have the cloths longer than the entire length of the sword, especially where the crossguard is. Now, remember before when I said I really like the turtleneck? This is why. It usually supports the top of the pommel handle very nicely, and if I want to do some extra, like if there's rust there and I need to do some extra polishing or whatever, it's really nice for that. And here is my collection of materials I use. Again, it's going to be a variety, but in general, this is the materials that I use. Some were recommended to me, some were recommended directly, some indirectly. And I think only one of them I found on my own. For example, we have the Sandflex hand block. That was something that I found on my own. And that was in a completely unrelated purchase. This was another item I found on my own because of leatherworking and trying to help my brother soften up some deer hides that we were tanning. Steel wool was recommended to me in person at my fencing club as we were doing a day of just cleaning swords. Steel wool comes in a variety of different formats. Let's say formats. Steel wool comes in a variety of different formats, from fine to medium to coarse, and depending on what your store has, sometimes even ones in between. And then this in combination with a pyroil, I've noticed attack rust, especially deep rust pockets, with very, very good success. And of course, if you're talking about tackling rust pockets, looking over at the beautiful sword here, there's no rust pockets on it currently for me to demonstrate. But before you take and you use the penetrating oil on the steel wool, I first like to use the Sandflex hand block. That helps me understand if the rust is just on the surface or if it's deeper than the surface. And then if it's deeper than just the surface, that's where the steel wool comes in. Again, you got coarse, you got medium, you got fine. I use fine for the lighter swords, like my foil, my fairy saber, my epee, my rapier. And for the bigger swords, like the hand-and-a-half sword, the sabers, the metal sabers, the metal long swords, and especially in this case the Zweihander, I like to use the medium to coarse steel wool, again, depending on how bad the rust is. And the steel wool on its own isn't bad. Where I like to use it in conjunction with the penetrating oil is when the rust is very deep and it's going to take me multiple sanding attempts to get the rust off or treat the rust. Then I really like to use the coarse with the penetrating oil. That seems to really help treat the metal in between, and when I come back to it for another sand job, like 10 to 15 minutes later, an hour later, a day later, again, depending on if I get called away for something or if I'm trying to fit it in around my workday. This helps treat the metal. Then we have turtle wax, which was recommended on a HEMA sub that I don't know if I even still have the link to, but this helps once you're done with getting the rust treated, and then you let the metal dry. This has worked in covering the metal of the sword so that it prevents rust. It might very well also be this plus the region that I'm in makes it so that it's less likely to rust or more rust resistant. I'm from the Midwest, Wisconsin region, so we have a lot of humidity. So maybe that's why it works so well. But anyway, I really like it for that reason. You can definitely use the sponge that comes along with to spread it on. However, this is where the socks come in handy. As you can see, I have a sock on my hand. This is a normal anklet sock. Over here on the right, we see that I have a longer sock, calf sock, whatever you want to call them. But anyway, it's a longer sock. Either way, either one of these two socks helps a lot with getting the compound on the material and helps with spreading along the entire length of the blade or crossguard or wherever you're treating the rust. And that is my entire setup. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. See you in the next one.